We're going to keep monitoring this hearing. I do want to get your reaction first, Barrett, to that exchange we just heard talking about this so-called anti-weaponization fund that the DOJ is setting up, as well as what he said about the Epstein files and meeting with survivors. Your takeaway?
Yeah, so the senator's questions on the slush fund piece of it were so important because they really get to the ethically tricky part of this whole settlement, which is there was no need for the DOJ to enter into this settlement agreement in the first place, and there's no court authorization of the settlement, no independent body looking into the terms of the settlement. So what do I mean by that? So we know that Trump and his children and the Trump Organization had filed this $10 billion lawsuit alleging that they had been harmed as a result of the disclosure from an IRS contractor of his tax records. We don't know if there was actually harm. The litigation didn't really proceed that far, but the Justice Department decided to settle this litigation despite every expert saying that this was actually a fairly weak case. Number one, because the president was essentially suing himself because he was suing an agency that he had control over, potential statute of limitations issues, a host of reasons. Yet despite that it was an ostensibly weak case, and despite the fact that the Justice Department has defended itself in other similar cases, they decided to take this really unprecedented step by settling the case and taking money, $1.7 billion of public funds, and putting it into this weaponization thing. That raises so many questions, and there's no judge there to get to say into whether this is legal or not.
Right. And we're talking $2 billion almost, Ken. This is taxpayer money. How did you interpret Todd Blanche's answers to those questions? And what do we really know about how this fund is supposed to work?
Well, look, first I should say, Anna, that one of the leading watchdog groups in Washington has called this fund one of the most corrupt acts in the history of the federal government. So let's just frame it that way, because that's how a lot of people are talking about this right now. We've never seen anything like this in American history. I think what you just saw there with Todd Blanche was interesting. Todd Blanche is a smart man. Todd Blanche was a federal prosecutor for many, many years, and he is a much better witness in these hearings than his predecessor, Pam Bondi, was, who was shrill, who was yelling, who was trying to insult senators. Todd Blanche is crafty. He knows how to answer questions. He knows how to parry with Chris Van Hollen, who's a very excellent interrogator there. But the people that I talk to who have known Todd Blanche for years cannot believe what they are seeing from Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. They cannot believe, just to cite what we're talking about right now, that he would get behind this idea of a fund of nearly $2 billion to pay out to people who were victims of so-called weaponization in the previous Justice Department. And let's just frame that. This is a big lie. There was no weaponization in the first Trump Justice Department or in the Biden Justice Department, as these guys are claiming. That the investigations they're talking about have been independently reviewed in the case of the Russia investigation. And in the case of the Jack Smith investigation, they've got the records right now, and they have not shown any evidence that there was political motivation or bias. And so the fundamental underlying animating feature of this, the idea that people were discriminated against for political reasons, is just false. It's a lie. And Todd Blanche is out there getting behind it.
And in fact, Todd Blanche is answering more questions related to this fund that, again, came out of an IRS lawsuit initially. Let's listen.
But as far as being transparent and having those quarterly reports released, yes.
Thank you. You referenced a previous case. I think it was Keepsiegel versus Vilsack under the previous administration. Did that case involve a president suing his own government and then settling that case before it could be reviewed or approved by a judge?
So no, neither does the commission.
It did not. And so when you suggested that they're nearly identical, they're not identical. I think there's a critical difference here. President Trump is the first president to sue his own government and then direct his chosen acting attorney general to reach this kind of settlement. Will you commit that none of President Trump's family will receive a direct payout from this fund?
Well, yes, but what you just said is not true. I mean, if I can correct that.
Please.
The president did not direct me to do anything. And secondly, when we said it was that the structure of the commission is similar to Keepsiegel, that's true. It wasn't the case. The underlying case is not the same. The structure of the commission is the same as the Keepsiegel
commission. Has it ever happened that a sitting president sued his own government for $10 billion and then directed the settlement of the case and the establishment of a payout fund?
Not that I'm aware, but there's a lot of things that President Trump's the first of. No president had been indicted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Correct.
6, 7, 8 times either.
Correct. No president's been indicted. And will you commit that none of this money will go to President Trump's campaign donors?
I am not committing to anything beyond the settlement agreement itself. When you say campaign donors, that they are not excluded from seeking compensation.
Last question. During Police Week, I heard from a number of law enforcement friends who found it appalling that there was the possibility that folks like the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys who had assaulted Capitol police officers could receive multi-million-dollar payouts from this fund. Will you commit that no one who has been convicted of assaulting a police officer will receive a payout from this fund?
So I shared the concerns that apparently members of law enforcement gave to you last week, although none of this was announced last week, so that's surprising. But
they had heard rumors there would be a settlement fund.
Okay, but anybody can apply. The commission will set. The commissioners will set rules. I'm sure that's not for me to set. That's for the commissioners. And whether an individual, an oath keeper, as you just mentioned, applies for compensation, is anybody in this country can apply.
Well, we'll be watching this very closely as this goes forward. I don't think the settlement fund should be set up this way or for these purposes. I appreciate your answers today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.